Have you ever reached a moment in your life when you said, "That's it, I can't carry this weight anymore"? Maybe it wasn't out loud. Maybe it was just a quiet thought during your morning walk, or sitting alone after another one of those exhausting phone calls. But somewhere deep inside, you knew something had to change. If you've been the parent of an adult child with deeply self-centered patterns, you know this weight. It's not just physical fatigue, it's emotional exhaustion. You've given and given, sometimes sacrificing your peace, your boundaries, and even your health. And now, maybe for the first time in your life, you're thinking of doing something incredibly brave. You're thinking of stepping away. You're thinking of choosing yourself. Now, before we go further, I want to say this. You are not selfish. You are not cruel. And no, you are not a bad parent for needing space, distance, or even a complete break. You are a human being with limits. You have the right to peace, especially after decades of giving everything you had to raise a child who may have only ever taken. In today's video, we're going to talk about what often happens next. What happens when you decide to walk away from a deeply self-focused child for good? This isn't easy. Children with this kind of behavior don't let go without a fight. Not because they love deeply, but because they crave control. And when they realize they're losing that control over you, their reactions can be startling. There are 3 common responses you may see from them, and understanding these can help you stand firm, protect your emotional health, and reclaim the peace you deserve. Let's begin with the first one: denial rooted in their need for dominance. You've likely experienced denial in your own life. Maybe when you lost someone you loved, or when you faced a diagnosis you weren't ready to hear. Denial in those cases is human. It's tender. It's the mind trying to protect itself from pain. But the kind of denial we're talking about here, that's a very different animal. When a child with controlling and self-important tendencies realizes you're pulling away permanently, they don't grieve the way a loving child would. They don't reflect. They don't wonder what they did wrong. Their denial isn't about loss. It's about losing power. You see, for years, you may have been their emotional supplier, the one they called when they needed to vent, the one they leaned on for money, validation, or even a punching bag for their anger. So, when you cut the cord, it creates a crisis in their world. They cannot accept that you, the person they thought they had total access to, are now saying no. They may act like nothing has changed. They'll keep texting as if you didn't just set a boundary. They might even show up at your door, pretending like everything's fine. Why? Because their brain literally rejects the idea that you've stopped playing the role they assigned you. They'll rewrite reality. "You're just having a mood," they'll say. "You've always been dramatic." Or they'll gaslight you. "You're making a big deal out of nothing." This denial isn't ignorance, it's strategy. If they pretend hard enough, maybe you'll slide back into your old habits. Maybe you'll pick up the phone again, offer comfort, or let them manipulate your guilt. But here's where your strength matters most. The more calmly you stay grounded in your truth, without explaining, justifying, or engaging, the more their denial begins to crack. That's when we usually see the next reaction, a wave of feigned regret. Now, this part can feel incredibly confusing, because after months or years, or even decades, of mistreatment, suddenly your child may start sounding sincere. They may say, "I'm sorry, I know I've hurt you, I want to change." You might hear them say things they've never said before. "I miss you. I've been thinking about everything you did for me. You're the only one who's ever been there, and I want you to know." It's okay if those words shake you a little. It's okay if part of you wants to believe they've finally come around. That maybe, just maybe, this is the moment you've been waiting for. But here's what's really happening. People with this personality pattern rarely feel guilt the way you and I do. What they feel is threatened. Your absence has created a vacuum. They don't miss your love. They miss the attention and control they once drew from you. And now, they're trying to pull you back in the only way they know how, through manipulation disguised as vulnerability. These apologies, they're usually vague. You'll notice they can't name what they're sorry for. They might say, "I've made mistakes." But if you press them, which ones? They'll stammer, change the subject, or get defensive. Because deep down, they don't believe they've done anything wrong. They just want things to go back to the way they were, for their sake. One woman I worked with had a son who barely spoke to her for years, except when he needed money. When she finally stopped sending it, she received the longest text message he'd ever sent her. It was full of tears, apologies, and "I love you, Mom." But right at the end, "I'm trying to pay my rent this month. If you can just help me out one last time." That's the tell. That's the mask slipping. But even when there's no money involved, the pattern is the same. They cry. They beg. They talk about how they'll be gone one day, and "you'll regret this." It's not accountability. It's emotional blackmail. The danger here isn't just believing them. It's betraying yourself in the process. You've likely spent much of your life hoping for their change, wishing for closeness, wanting them to see your heart. So when these fake apologies come, it can feel like a dream come true. But please remember, love without respect is just control with a nicer face. If they truly wanted a relationship, they would have honored your boundaries before you walked away, not after. Standing strong doesn't mean you don't love them. It means you're finally loving yourself too. And this is the moment where things usually shift again. When the denial didn't work, the fake apology failed, and you're still walking away. Now the mask falls completely. And what comes next? Well, it's the most painful and dangerous reaction of all. When the denial doesn't pull you back in, and the insincere apologies fall flat. The deeply self-focused child begins to understand something terrifying. For them, they're losing. Not just losing you, but losing control. Losing the role they cast you in. The caregiver, the fixer, the emotional sponge. You're no longer on their stage. And for someone with strong self-centered traits, this is more than upsetting. It's an ego injury. An insult to the image they have of themselves as powerful, in control, and impossible to replace. That's when the third reaction surfaces. It's often the most dramatic, the most cruel, and the most painful to witness. When all else fails, they will try to destroy you. This might sound harsh, maybe even unbelievable, especially if you still think of your child as the little one you held in your arms decades ago. But this kind of destructive pattern doesn't operate on love. It operates on ownership. And when a person with these traits feels they've lost their grip on you, they flip from acting like a victim to becoming an attacker almost overnight. Their goal now isn't to win you back. It's to make sure you suffer for leaving. They may begin with your reputation, subtle at first. Whispers to family, mutual friends, even your other children. Things like, "Mom's losing her mind," or "Dad's become so negative lately." They twist stories, paint themselves as the wounded party, and cast you as cold, ungrateful, or unstable. And often they do it so convincingly that even people who once knew your heart may start to question it. One father I spoke with had gone low contact with his daughter after years of manipulation. Within weeks, he found out she'd been telling people at church that he was emotionally abusive and that she was only trying to heal from childhood trauma. He was stunned. Not because she was angry, but because she rewrote history so convincingly that even his longtime friends began to pull away. This is what people with these controlling, self-focused tendencies do. When they can't control the way you see them, they try to control the way others see you. And it doesn't stop with words. Some adult children with deeply controlling, self-centered tendencies will weaponize the legal system. Maybe it's a dispute over finances. Maybe they drag you into court for something small just to exhaust you. Or worse, they try to cut off contact between you and your grandchildren. They know where it hurts, and they go straight for the heart. Others may attack your finances. If you've supported them financially in the past, they may demand more or guilt trip you into helping again. If you refuse, they may threaten you, slander you, or even try to manipulate wills, inheritances, or assets. These aren't just outbursts. They're calculated punishments designed to break you down and pull you back under their control. And if you're wondering, why would someone do this to their own parent? I want to say this with gentleness. It's because they don't see you as a parent in the way a healthy child would. They see you as supply, a tool, a means to an end. The moment you stop being useful, you become a threat to their identity. And threats must be eliminated. It's heartbreaking, I know, especially when you've spent years hoping, sacrificing, and believing in the goodness of your child. And yet, in this storm of rage and retaliation, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see clearly. You see the manipulation for what it is. You notice how fast the love turned into hatred, how quickly the soft words became weapons. That clarity, that's freedom knocking at your door. Because when you truly see someone for who they are, not who you hoped they would become, you stop negotiating with their potential. You start protecting your peace. Now let me pause here and speak directly to your heart. If this is where you are right now, if your child is in the phase of rage, retaliation, and destruction, you are not alone. You are not weak, and you do not deserve this. You are a parent, yes, but you are also a person who has the right to boundaries, a person who deserves to rest, a person who is not required to be emotionally abused in the name of family. You're not turning your back on love. You're turning your back on harm. There's a big difference. And for some of you, that choice may come with consequences. You might lose connections with extended family. You may be called names. You might sit alone on holidays for a while. But hear me clearly. Silence and peace can feel lonely at first, but they are never as lonely as being surrounded by people who constantly hurt you. There is strength in solitude. There is power in no longer being available for emotional chaos. And there is healing in finally saying, I matter too. You've given your child years, maybe decades, to get it right. You've tried every approach: soft words, firm boundaries, tough love, second chances. You've earned the right to live the rest of your life in peace. You've done enough. You are enough. And if no one else has said this to you yet, let me be the first. I see you. I honor your strength. And I'm proud of you for choosing to step away from what no longer serves your soul. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to walk through the fire. And while that path may be painful, it's also the only one that leads to freedom. Because once you get past the rage, the denial, the guilt trips, and the lies, once you stand firm and say, no more, something beautiful starts to happen. You begin to heal. You begin to breathe again. And most importantly, you begin to remember who you were before their storm drowned out your voice. You are not just someone's parent. You are someone's self. And that self deserves to live free. Even after the storm, after the smear campaigns, the fake apologies, the accusations, you may still feel something lingering. Not fear, not regret, but a quiet kind of grief. Not because you wish you hadn't left, but because you never wanted it to come to this. And if you're feeling that way right now, I want you to know it's completely normal. You didn't raise your child hoping one day you'd have to step away from them. You didn't spend years of your life changing diapers, helping with homework, sacrificing sleep, and worrying endlessly because you wanted to one day say, I'm done. But sometimes love means letting go. Not because you stopped loving them, but because they never truly respected the love you gave. That kind of grief is complex. It's not black and white. It's not anger or peace. It's both. It's mourning what could have been, while making room for what can still be. And that's where you are now, standing at a turning point. Because the moment you walk away from the constant chaos they create, you finally walk toward yourself. This is your time. Time to rebuild your life, not around their needs, their moods, their crises, but around your joy, your peace, your sense of worth. Maybe it's as simple as having a calm morning again, drinking your coffee without waiting for the next emotional ambush. Maybe it's rediscovering hobbies you haven't touched in years, picking up a paintbrush, gardening, joining a local group that laughs more than it complains. Maybe it's reconnecting with old friends, the ones you pushed away because you were always too busy managing someone else's feelings. Or maybe, for the first time in a very long time, it's about doing nothing at all and finally feeling okay with that, because you've spent a lifetime in service of others, especially this child. And while love is giving, it should never cost you yourself. I know some days might still feel heavy. You might hear a song, see a photo, or receive a birthday card that feels more like a wound than a gift. But don't mistake pain for a sign. You made the wrong choice. Sometimes the right thing hurts first, but heals forever. And you're healing now, even if your child is still spinning their stories, even if relatives don't understand, even if some days you second-guess yourself. You're healing every time you say, "I deserve peace." You're healing every time you don't answer that toxic message. You're healing every time you choose calm over chaos. Because healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just sitting quietly with yourself and realizing you're no longer walking on eggshells. That's freedom, and you've earned it. Now, before we end, I want to speak to one more group of you. Those who are just beginning this journey. You may still be in the early stages, still wondering if your child truly has deeply self-centered patterns, still questioning your own memory, still hoping things might change if you try one more time. That's okay. We've all been there. It takes time to wake up from a lifetime of emotional conditioning. It takes time to believe your pain is real when it's been dismissed for so long. But let me offer you this. If you're constantly confused, if you feel like you're always the one apologizing, if your love is never enough and your boundaries are always too much, something isn't right. Healthy love doesn't feel like you're drowning. And walking away isn't giving up. It's waking up. You are allowed to stop shrinking yourself to keep the peace. You are allowed to stop explaining yourself to people who never listen. You are allowed to stop fixing someone who never truly wanted to be whole. You can still love your child and walk away from their abuse. You can still pray for them and protect your own spirit. You can still have hope for their healing without sacrificing your own. And if you've already walked that road and you're farther along, I want you to know your courage matters. Every time you speak the truth of your experience, you give someone else permission to do the same. Every time you hold the line with love and firmness, you break generational patterns. Every time you say, "No more," you say yes to the kind of life you were always meant to live. So to all the mothers, fathers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, anyone who has been emotionally bruised by someone they raised or loved deeply, this message is for you. You are not alone, you are not crazy, you are not weak. You are reclaiming your story, and there is so much life left to be lived. Let your golden years be golden, not because of who shows up at your table, but because of how much peace you carry within yourself. Leave space for real love to enter your life. Not love that uses, confuses, or manipulates, but love that uplifts, honors, and sees you. That kind of love exists. Sometimes it comes from new friendships, sometimes from a loving pet, sometimes from strangers who become chosen family, but most importantly, it must come from within you. So if this video spoke to your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what part of your journey you're on, or simply let someone else here know that they're not walking this path alone. And if you found this helpful, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Strong Elderly Life. We create content to support your healing, your wisdom, and your right to peace. No matter your age, you are more than the role you played. You are more than the hurt you endured. You are you, and that's more than enough. Here's to living your strongest, freest, and most peaceful life, starting now.